So, okay, just welcome to everyone back to the Crown Pub on a Thursday afternoon. Great to see everyone. There's a few more people coming in. Today, I'm in the hot seat and I'm talking to a gentleman I've been following and stalking on the internet, a guy called James Mead, who's very knowledgeable in the world of procurement. And I've invited him to the Crown Pub so we can benefit from his wealth of knowledge. He does some great podcasts with quite senior people in procurement, and it all affects us because people buy the stuff that we make and we sell in the print industry. So yeah, without further ado, I mean, James, can you tell us a bit about yourself and where you are?
Yeah, would love to. Thanks for having me, Kelvin. Pleasure to join you. I know absolutely nothing about the print industry, so that's a good place to start. Yeah, so my background, as Kelvin mentioned, I'm a procurement pro by background. I spent 16 years in corporate procurement. Started off in the automotive industry with Jaguar Land Rover, and then worked for a couple of tier ones. Before moving across into the FMCG or fast-moving consumer goods sector. After the 2008-2009 recession, I decided I want to be in an industry that was a bit more recession-proof. And as COVID has shown us, we all need toilet paper in a recession. So that was quite a good move. Spent most of my professional career actually in Germany, although I'm originally from the UK, grew up not far away from Birmingham actually, so I know it well. And then at the end of 2018, I left to start my own business, and I'm now based in the mountains of Bulgaria, where I can have better weather and pay a lot less tax. So it's a beautiful part of the world if you ever get to come here. Lots of skiing, lots of hiking in summer, good food, nice wine. Probably not as good as the wine in Chile and Argentina, as we'd established a bit earlier before everyone joined. And so my latest venture is I do a little bit of independent consulting, but my main venture is my t-shirt, which is procurementsoftware.site. It's a directory website of procurement tech solutions. As with a lot of industries or with a lot of sectors, digital transformation within procurement and supply chain is a very hot topic at the moment. Sales and manufacturing have had a lot of investment around digitization. Procurement traditionally hasn't. A lot of our processes are still done on email and Excel and SharePoint. And unlike sales, we don't have teams of administrative assistants or support functions because, wrongly in my opinion, but procurement is often seen in organizations as being an overhead rather than an asset. And therefore, it's often quite a leanly staffed function. So if you've ever been struggling to get your buyers to pick up the phone or respond to emails, I promise you they're not ignoring you for the most part. It is a leanly staffed function in most organizations.
So we know about web to print, which is obviously what some of us do here, and selling print and the way people buy and over the pandemic, Amazon, eBay, we rely more on buying online, but the term e-procurement seems to be really popular at the moment, and it's everywhere. So, what exactly is e-procurement, and why is it so important at the moment?
Yeah, so e-procurement, in the form that most lay people would know it or understand it, is essentially going online and buying something through a punch-out catalog. So if you're in the B2B space and the most common categories that this is used for are things like general industrial supplies and office stationery, where in big organizations they'll have a punch out catalog to an MRO distributor or an electrical distributor or a Staples or someone like that, where stakeholders, users can go onto a catalog and just go and buy something as long as they've got a set budget that's been approved by their line manager or cost center owner. So as procurement doesn't have to touch very, very tactical, low value, high volume purchases. What we think of e-procurement as being in the procurement sense as procurement professionals is essentially digitizing the end-to-end procure to pay or requisition to pay process to remove as much manual work from procurement teams as possible if it's, if it's transactional administrative tasks that doesn't necessarily need to be done by, a skilled procurement pro. So it's really around self-service procurement is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but it's giving the stakeholder or the requisitioner the autonomy to essentially go out and buy something themselves, because nobody ever in an organization ever said, we love contacting procurement to get them to go out and buy stuff for us. In an ideal world, you'd love to go out and buy stuff yourselves, but procurement want to make sure, obviously, as the custodians of budgets and compliance and how companies spend their money, that you're doing that in a compliant way from a supplier that they've gone out and got the best deal or the most solid terms and conditions with. So it's really about giving that autonomy back to the stakeholder to go out and buy, but according to the guidelines and the processes and the preferred suppliers that have been put in place by the procurement team, essentially.
Is it fair to say that, eProcurement is a company's version of Amazon or eBay, but in a closed environment? Is it?
Yeah, it is. I think the big difference between eProcurement in a B2B space and going on a B2B website like Amazon is that if I, as a consumer, go onto Amazon, I can theoretically go on there and buy anything that I want to, assuming that I've got enough money on my credit card to go out and buy it. E-procurement within the B2B space will usually have some sort of compliance or budget restrictions behind it. So, if I'm the custodian of, let's say, an office supplies catalog, or even a print catalog for that matter, let's use that as an example. And if I want to go out and buy business cards, then my manager or my procurement team may have said, okay, you can go out and do that, but you're not having anything fancy like the ridged edges or the curved corners or anything like that, and you can only buy a certain paper thickness. So e-procurement theoretically is the same, but usually there will be some sort of constraints or gatekeeper behind it to make sure that it's not maverick spend.
Yeah, see, Kevin, finishing comes into every conversation.
That's so true.
Is that a hot topic, is it? Or?
yeah. It's what Kevin does. He's an expert in that area.
Yeah, well, it's the topic for most, and substrates are one of the issues surrounding that. So e-procurement has to address what's going on in the industry and making things available. There's other business models that exist on, or significant a number of business models that exist, depending on the size of the company that's doing the procurement. One is understanding the type of products that need to be available. So Kevin broached the subject, Kelvin broached the subject.
All in the L.
Yeah, really. I'll give you L. As far as understanding the rules for procurement, things like multiple bidding, getting 3 quotes, a big thing in the US, and understanding the availability of product and that the website is current on where it's at, the logistics that are involved, whether they ship or they have to use your shipping. Those kinds of things are all components of procurement. How does, I'm looking at your website, how do your solutions support that? And I use the word, I'm using it as the plural because it looks like you refer people to different procurement softwares. I'm a little confused on what your business does and how it would handle those kinds of needs.
Yeah, so let me try and break that down into 2. So competitive bidding is a great question. So in its most simple form, most organizations will have a policy that above a certain amount of spend, in theory, you have to go out and competitively bid whatever you're buying. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to that if it's something that's health and safety critical, or if it's something that is supplied by a monopoly supplier or distributor. But most corporates will have a policy that goes along the lines of something like, if you're buying something that's over $10,000 in value, then you have to go out and get 3 bids or prove that there aren't the market players out there to facilitate that. That's all well and good, but then if you're then it kind of gets very nuanced and then say, okay, so if it's something that encompasses a very big category like print in a lot of organizations, then instead of going out and getting three bids for everything that you go out and buy, what you're probably going to do is do a competitive tender and due diligence on the supply base in general, and then do a tender and say, okay, we're looking for a preferred supplier for all of our print and promotional items for X amount of time, and the winning bidder is going to be our preferred supplier, and they will get first right of refusal on every business, on everything that we go out and buy. Because to do three bids and a buy for every individual piece, it's a non-critical, high volume, low spend item, typically, if you look at it on a transaction by transaction basis. So that's typically how procurement would tackle something like print and promotional items. You're also going to get, in most procurement teams, this typically is something that, unless procurement have got their arms around this and have quite a close collaboration with their marketing colleagues, you will often see this as being something that's very decentralized and not well controlled, depending on the level of procurement maturity that you have in that business. So you could find as a supplier that you can pretty much charge whatever you want or negotiate very favorable terms if you're dealing with a marketing director or a brand manager. Whereas if procurement have got their arms around it, they're probably going to be much more cute in regards to some of the tricks that you play in the industry in terms of maximizing your price or the favorability of your T's and C's. So I think understanding the relationship that marketing and procurement have in any of your customers is paramount to understand, how can you build on that relationship? Because if procurement have a lot of sway in that organization, the worst thing that you can do is try to bypass them, because you will rue that decision as soon as they put your business out to tender. So I think that is key to understanding your customer. In terms of what my business does, to answer the second part of that, procurementsoftware.site is essentially aimed at procurement professional, heads of procurement, CFOs, boutique consultancies, to help them find and understand the market around digitizing their procurement operations. We also help. I individually help as a consultant independently to take a medium-sized manufacturing business like a printer and to help guide them through how can they optimize or digitize their procurement processes end to end to ensure that you're eliminating a lot of the administrative side of your procurement ops, so as you're not sending invoices and purchase orders by email, or you're not having to update accounts payable information of your suppliers through email and Excel sheets. There are tools that can digitize and automate that and relieve a lot of the day-to-day administrative process, as well as doing things like spend analytics and e-sourcing on the buy side. So two sort of separate things.
Right. And so your technologies will integrate with things like a procurement system like an Ariba, or something that's under the banner of Oracle, or any of the larger ERPs. Is that for a larger company, would you be handling the integration to those? I'm not quite sure what your service is. I don't quite understand.
Yeah,
all the things you talk about are relevant, from a request for proposal, where you said we want you to be our supplier type of thing. That's an RFP kind of question. I'm just curious where you fit into the mix of creating those relationships or resolving those immediate needs for a particular project. I'm a little confused.
James, you're a consultant. You advise.
Yeah. So we're not an IT. We're not an IT business. We don't do the actual implementation of the tech, because we're not an IT. We're not a technical consultancy. We understand the market of what's out there in terms of procurement tech better than pretty much any consultancy, I would say, because we've researched it. We've got 275 websites listed on companies listed on the website, and we do the upstream part of the market knowledge / RFI process of helping clients to understand what technology is out there and what need does it serve in terms of their challenges. Ariba is an example of an old legacy brand enterprise procure to pay or procurement tech suite that is a lot behind the times at the moment, but a lot of customers are sort of stuck with it because their IT department don't want to move away from it. There are a lot of solutions now that can sit on top of Ariba and that can integrate with it, because I'll tell you a secret: procurement professionals hate using Ariba because it's so clunky. The suppliers hate using it for bids or for submitting invoices because it's not easy to use. And in terms of supplier experience or being a customer of choice, large enterprises have realized that Ariba is not a user-friendly tool, neither for their procurement teams nor for the suppliers that they force to use it. So SAP and Cooper, who are another big player in this space, have gone down the Salesforce route and have created app stores within their ecosystem to allow best of breed solutions to plug into that. So as they've recognized that they're falling behind, but they want to maintain some sort of control over ensuring that people still use their technology as the central platform that sort of stuff plugs into to communicate to it.
So James, these e-procurement systems, so I remember when Ariba was new. I've been in the industry that long, but we supply these systems. They buy a lot of print. There's a lot of print in these areas. So Oracle, SAP, Ariba, NetSuite, Wax Digital, there's a whole bunch of companies that are out there. But are these systems fundamentally not driving the price of the supplier, fundamentally print? Are they driving prices down, or is it benefit to engage with them?
I think there's a benefit to engage with them. Obviously, I'd be a fool to say that e-auctions don't drive the price down, because they do in terms of a piece by piece, cost per SKU. I think the key there is that when a company does a tender or does an e-auction, one of the overarching goals that they have with that is supplier consolidation. Also, all companies, especially if they're big behemoths that have got international production, they've grown by acquisition, they may be running multiple ERPs, they've got a bunch of long tail vendors that they don't really want to deal with, that they see as being nuisance suppliers, for want of a better word. Just like sales categorize their customers as A's, B's and C's, procurement classify their vendors as being strategic or core vendors versus tail spend. It's like the classic 80-20 Pareto principle that 20% of your spend typically comes from the long tail of 80% of your vendors, whereas your core suppliers that you're spending 80% of your revenue with or your spend with only represent about 20% of the total supplier count. So when companies do these e-auctions or e-RFPs, their overarching goal is to reduce the number of suppliers that they deal with. So while they might push the price down and squeeze your margins a little bit, the opportunity there is that you will become their supplier of choice, and they want to work with strategic partners. And that's a method that they use to get them to that point. So, if you can get through to a second round of a tender and then ultimately win the business, and, these days, most companies base their tender results on more than just price. It's usually a qualifying factor to be, in the final shortlist of the 3 or 4 that they'll then go into negotiation with. But usually they want to know about, quality and lead time and payment terms, and how difficult are you to deal with as a supplier. These non-price factors, and increasingly now things like ESG are going to come into it as well. Possibly not in smaller businesses for the time being, but it will be a factor as time goes on. So I would see it as an opportunity rather than a threat, and I would engage with it as best you can, because it's a golden opportunity if you pay the attention to it and give it the right amount of focus to increase the amount of business that you could get with those companies that are tendering. Now, I will caveat that with the incumbent supplier is always going to be at an unfair advantage, because it's a pain in the bum to switch suppliers. generally. If you've got to do contracting, onboarding, maybe there's quality involved, maybe marketing don't want to get rid of their existing supplier because they play golf with them, or they have good corporate hospitality. There are all sorts of reasons why it's difficult to switch away from an incumbent vendor. But the worst thing that you can possibly do as a supplier is just to ignore what the buyer is asking for in the RFP and just submit your quotes or your conditions based on your own format, because that, speaking from a buyer's perspective, that just pisses me off, because I've got to take that data and transpose that data into the right format and then compare it and contrast it and do all of the analysis. Whereas if you enter it into the bidding system in the format that's been requested, you're going to be one step ahead of the competition because you've done what I've asked you to.
Yeah. Kelvin, can I ask one question, because he's touched upon ERP systems, and I'm going to call this like a huge advantage for printers. In my experience in it, and I'll keep this extremely brief, is with the FMCG arena, and it was pickles, of all things. There's an issue with that in terms of shelf life, when they're going to process this, when they have to deliver it to the retailers who are actually selling it in store, how long it can be on the shelf. And that was driven, or a huge component of it had to do with when they needed the labels printed for it, and when those labels needed to be, processed to be available for the, in this case, well, I call it the canning, but it was in jars, of course, that would be in a timely fashion, so that being involved with that ERP system, which handled the procurement of that, was critical to the printer to be able to plan for it, to know when they had to have the product ready for the person to do the canning. So the participation in that ERP procurement world is critical to, especially in the label market, another, beyond embellishment, one of the growth areas that printers have relied on in the last couple of years, and going forward. So these are the kinds of things that your business would advise on, in terms of a company that says, yes, I'm handling a lot of fast moving consumer goods, therefore I need to be integrated into their ERP so I know what their manufacturing process is. Is this something that you as a consultancy advise on for suppliers, printer being a supplier?
Not really, no. We're a procurement / technical advisory consultancy. So, we help companies to digitize their procurement operations. We don't do ERP integration or onboarding into bidding platforms.
Okay.
However, we do, Robert, if you ever needed it. We do a lot of that. We do a lot of that integration, and we get good revenue from it as well. And it's integrated into printers. And one of the things I was keen to ask James is, so as suppliers, we like to think that the print industry is quite important to these organizations, and they do buy a lot of the print market. But, is it fair to say that the majority, if not all, of the medium to large organizations who buy the goods from our industry, the print industry, are moving to eProcurement systems? And by eProcurement, I'm meaning ERP, your Cooper, your Salesforce, your SAP, Ariba, those kind of systems. Are they all moving that way? Is that the direction that purchasing is going?
I would not call an ERP system eProcurement. ERP systems are the nemesis to us as procurement professionals, because they're designed for finance and sales and operations, and they don't really serve the needs of procurement professionals. You can do operational procurement through ERPs. You can do material scheduling for direct production materials pretty well through an ERP system, but they're very, very clunky to do any sort of strategic or streamlined procurement operations through, because they look and feel like they were built in the 1990s, because they were essentially. So if we talk about eProcurement, Cooper and Ariba are eProcurement systems, albeit quite legacy tech compared to some of the more nimble best of breed solutions that are out there. But SAP as an ERP system, or Oracle or NetSuite are not e-procurement systems. E-procurement, or automation / digitization of transactional procurement processes, I think most Fortune 500 companies have done something along these lines. I mean, they've probably done it badly, and their adoption and level of acceptance within their internal stakeholder community maybe isn't as it should be. But I think most Fortune 500 companies have done digitization of operational procurement processes to some extent. And I think this is going to trickle down more into the mid-market now, because with all of the supply chain challenges and this deluge of process and additional work that's going to come from things like ESG that's being forced upon these organizations, procurement teams are going to have to do more with less. And the only way that they're going to be able to do that is to either get rid of some of the clunky processes, to hire more admin staff to do some of the grunt work, so as they can free up the strategic resources to do what they should be doing, like building supplier relationships and working with stakeholders on strategic projects, driving value, because it's not just about cost, or they will need to automate it and invest in tech. And investing in tech is obviously the sexiest one of those three, so that's tends to be where most of the attention is. Although, I do think departments can get a lot of the way there by eliminating a lot of process and investing in some administrative or analytic type roles to free up their procurement category managers and strategic sourcing managers to do the important stuff. You don't need to pay a procurement category manager 70 or 80,000 pounds a year, or $100K a year, to sit there tapping orders into SAP. There's a quote by a famous American marketing guru called Perry Marshall that says, the vast majority of $100,000 a year executives spend the majority of their time on $10 an hour tasks. And there's a lot of truth in that, especially in procurement teams, because they historically haven't had the admin support necessary. So I think it's inevitable that the digitization will sort of trickle down into, beyond just enterprise level companies. And print, rightly or wrongly, is often viewed as being quite a commoditized category. Don't shoot me for saying that. I'm comparing it to things like, things that are highly technical, like raw materials and CapEx and professional services and that type of thing. So when you look at it in that viewpoint, from the holistic standpoint, it is quite a commoditized category, in the sense that theoretically most suppliers in the industry can supply most stuff, and the way that you're going to distinguish yourselves then is through service and the ability that you can automate your end-to-end ordering and invoicing process, so as procurement doesn't have to get involved in things like delivery issues or content, part orders or invoicing issues. That's going to endear yourselves to the procurement professional, because it means it's lower touch for them, if they're juggling a lot of balls with all of the other things that they're trying to do.
I think we're quite accepting in the print industry that it's productized or commoditized now. That's the way it's moved, even though it's still a highly skilled, medium. We're quite accepting to that. So generally companies are adopting more procurement technology rather than moving away. It's a trend that carries on growing, in a quick summary. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of VC money flowing into Procure Tech, because they realize that it's a function that's suffered from a huge amount of underinvestment over the years. If you look at the investment into tech that HR and sales and manufacturing has had, and then look at procurement that's still using Excel and email to track millions and millions of pounds worth of spend, it's not a surprise to see that there's a vast opportunity there to really modernize the function. There are some, and I think procurement technology perhaps gets a bad name because, quite frankly, a lot of the legacy tech was a bit shit. And it's only now that we're getting into some really innovative stuff And it's not the SAPs and the Coopers and the Oracles that are coming out with that. It's the small startups that are really, really innovating and disrupting.
Yeah, we've done about 100, 150 punch out integrations over the years, and they've always been quite lucrative to us. But from a supplier's point of view, often a supplier, print supplier especially, looks at things, why do you need to spend 5-10 grand to link into that catalog? I mean, the advantages that I know is, in theory, they should be paid in 4 working days with no invoicing. Is there any other supply advantages that, as a supplier working with these large organizations to get their business, they should be aware of?
I mean, I think that the question about cost and integration is what's the anticipated benefit versus the cost, and ultimately how can you, in a smart way, how can you wrap that into the piece cost somehow so as you're not taking the hit. I mean, if a customer is willing to give you a preferred supplier status for a 2-year period, for example, then it's a drop in the ocean, really, isn't it? If it's a large enterprise, and it should just be seen as part of the customer management costs, just like having a key account manager would be, or an accounts payable person would be. Yeah, it's always an effort versus benefit. What's the size of the prize? Would I invest if I had a really sweet consultancy gig? Would I hire a lawyer to draft a contract to make sure that we got the I's dotted and the T's crossed? If it was 50k worth of work over the next 12 months, I probably would. If it was 1 day's consultancy, pick my brain sort of exercise, then I'd probably turn it down because it wouldn't pay back on the investment. It's a similar discussion. Yeah,
we've come across some print contracts that just simply haven't moved because suppliers embedded into the eProcurement system. And Morgan Stanley, Deloitte, they've not moved in 20 years from when we've done the integration. So it seems a really good opportunity to engage with a corporate who buys a lot of print. So yeah, I've heard you mention long tail spend, but I don't quite understand what that means. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, just like sales would have their A, B, and C customers, depending on whether they're a strategic, a maintain, or a nuisance customer, we would view the supply base as being the same. So the long tail spend would typically fall into categories that are pretty commoditized. There are low barriers to entry. They're high volume but low transactional value purchase orders. So typically a long tail vendor would be someone that has a pretty low average value of purchase order that goes out to them, and you're either doing a lot of low value transactions with them, or 1 or 2 small, or 1 or 2 higher value transactions, but the relationship is transactional rather than strategic. The core suppliers are typically going to be the suppliers that you're buying raw materials from every week to run your production, or your logistics provider, or your consultancies and your marketing agencies that are your core suppliers. Whereas your long tail are typically going to be the guy that comes to repair the air conditioning twice a year in your production facility, or the let me think of another example. The customs broker that you deal with twice a year because you're importing from a specific market and you only get 2 deliveries per year, or the electrical spare parts supplier that's supplying off-the-shelf product that you could theoretically go out and buy from any other distributor that's not a critical supplier, and that is not supplying things that are on a long lead time or that are highly technical in nature. They're what we would typically see. The type of spend that as a buyer you would see as something that you would want to leverage, rather than what you would see as being a bottleneck category that could potentially disrupt your production or supply operations.
Yeah. Where does print factor in there? Because some companies, print is an essential part of it, and some companies only use a little bit of print. But we've got some customers where, companies like Glaxo, it's paramount to their packaging and their messaging and advertising and documentation. So
yeah, it's you hit the nail on the head, Kelvin. It really depends on how strategic it is and how important it is to their bottom line. If you're if you're a retailer, then it's going to be absolutely paramount, isn't it? Because it's part of it. It's part of your advertising. It's part of your branding. You're going to be putting out those little brochures that you get through your junk mail every week in terms of the offers that they've got. If you're a tier 1 automotive supplier sending millions of parts into someone like Volkswagen, probably not going to be that important to you, is it? Because you're going to have 3 or 4 key customers, and the value of your brand is not going to be huge in terms of your marketing. Your relationships are going to be built on your sales team.
So what size companies use eProcurement? Do you think there'll be a moment in time when all companies will be using it? And I mention that in particular because the office products industry has always been quite linked to the print industry. We used to do a lot of work there. And a few years ago, Amazon came and did a presentation to the leaders of the industry in the UK. And they mentioned about delivering parcels by drones. And it wasn't about changing the way they delivered the products. It was about changing the way that people used Amazon to encompass the office products. And now a lot of those companies have lost their clients to Amazon. And Amazon now are starting to look towards the print industry, offering an e-procurement platform. So do you think there'll be a stage where all customers will be using some form of e-procurement platform? And as a web to print provider, we'll just be a facilitator plugging into that. I think everyone's going to use some piece of software to purchase stuff from off the internet.
I think you used a great example with Amazon, because the huge benefit that Amazon has is that most people as individuals have used Amazon as a consumer. So if you're a small business, if you're doing 1 or 2 million in revenue, and you have a purchasing policy of saying, okay, just buy everything through Amazon for Business, because you can get line item by line item detail of what's being spent, whereas if you're buying from 100 different vendors, you wouldn't have that. That's a great example of how that can essentially bring back a lot of control to a CFO in a business that's probably too small to have a procurement team. And if they do have a procurement person, it's probably going to be a very administrative transactional buyer. It's probably the office manager or the stores person that's doing it. So I think Amazon is a great example in terms of, will every company go down the e-procurement route? I mean, every company, I as essentially a one-person business with a couple of contractors that work for me can go on and get an account with Amazon for Business, and I could buy everything, from Amazon. I could do if they delivered in Bulgaria. When you get into a larger business and you're looking at having a print supply or having some sort of catalog procurement system as part of your procure to pay process, you could get a pretty bare bones but functional e-procurement system that does a pretty good job of digitizing procure to pay. You could see ROI on that if you're a £10 million or dollar business and upwards. I would suspect, there's a couple of companies I could point anyone to if they were interested in sort of digitizing their procurement operations and they were doing that size of revenue. They could give you ROI in a few months, because their price point, it would only cost you maybe about $5,000 a year to be able to implement it, in its bare bones format. You can go up all the way to the Saparibas and Coopers of the world that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy, and then you need an army of consultants to implement them on top of that. So there's a whole range of e-procurement or procure to pay solutions out there now that serve pretty much every end of the market, with the exception of mom and pop shops and very small businesses. But if you've got a 50 to 100 employees and doing 10-ish million in revenue and upwards, you would probably see some ROI, depending on what you produce, but you could, or what your business is, but you could probably see an ROI on having some sort of procurement tech in your business.
Is there not a business idea then, an Amazon type store for companies to just get whatever stuff they want, including the print?
There is, yeah. There's a company called Order based in New York, I think, that essentially does that. They do bespoke catalogs for predominantly tech startups, but for sort of small and medium-sized businesses to do exactly that, for any sort of regular repeatable purchases, to have a fixed price list of the goods that can be ordered. So, you know, if you want to stipulate, you know, if you're ordering office equipment, then, you know, you buy this folder, or you buy this pen, or you buy this desk organizer, to reduce the amount of maverick spend and bring the costs under control. And for everything that's then a one-time buy, you can then just go out and buy it on a P card, which again gives the CFO a fewer sleepless nights around, you know, how the budget's been spent. Yeah, Robert, so yeah, there absolutely is a business model. They just got something like $30 million in Series B funding.
Have you heard of them, Robert? You're nodding.
Absolutely, yeah. They're growing like crazy, and there's a lot of interest in how they can fit into existing businesses. A lot of people that I've spoken to have they're wondering. Actually, this is probably now I'm going to be referring James as a consultant, as somebody who understands how that would fit into a business. So you're going to need to get schooled on the vagaries of the print industry to be able to do that. But there's an opportunity sitting right in front of you.
Yeah, that'd be really cool, actually, Robert. Maybe to have an offline conversation on that, because I was speaking to orders, sales, and marketing team, because obviously they're a predominantly US company right now, and they're keen to understand the European market and what opportunities could be out there for them on this side of the pond. And their specific business model isn't really captured very well over here right now. I think they are hitting a very unique sort of slant on how people buy stuff. It's not everyone's cup of tea, because a lot of organizations want to give their people the autonomy to go out and buy whatever they want to buy within a certain budget range. But they do have a very specific niche, and yeah, I can see how it could fit.
Yeah, there's interest.
Yeah.
So James, where do you think eProcurement is going? Do you think it's going to follow the route of Amazon? You know, where we order something and it just arrives amazingly. So here in the UK, if we order, we can get same day Amazon deliveries. And I think you can in the States as well, but not all of the States. I know you can't in Europe in some places, but I think eProcurement is going to go down that route where, you know, software is going to mean that people get the stuff that they want to buy, perhaps even the print that they want to buy quicker, faster, cheaper, better.
I mean, I think it will facilitate shorter lead time, simply because it removes a lot of manual administration, and it removes pretty much all of the human error. You know, if you send a purchase order to someone's email and they're on holiday and it doesn't get forwarded to the person that's substituting for them, it would remove all of that. It's not going to shorten the lead times of the production facility, because production is production. You can't make stuff any quicker, can you? I mean, that's a lean manufacturing issue rather than a procure to pay issue. But it should certainly it should reduce the amount of accounts payable issues, or the cycle time from invoices getting booked to paid. It should facilitate, you know, order to cash a lot faster, and invoice discounting if SMEs want to get paid faster and offer a discount to facilitate that. There's tech out there that does that for some of the smaller printers that are out there where cash flow may be an issue, and it will reduce the time it will reduce the time from requisition through to purchase order confirmation, undoubtedly. But I don't think it won't lead to the Amazonization of every single category, because, you know, it's a lot printing something to individual spec is a lot different to shipping a 4-pack of Duracell batteries that's sitting in a warehouse off the shelf as a commodity product.
Amazonization, is that a word?
Just made it up, maybe, I don't know.
It's a word now.
So who's the main player? Is Cooper the biggest player, or SAP Ariba? Who's the biggest player in that market?
In terms of market share, SAP Ariba and Cooper are the market leaders in terms of procurement tech and procure to pay suites, but they're very much focused on enterprise customers. If you're doing less than $1 billion in revenue, I would tell you to avoid Cooper and Ariba like the plague. Not so much because of what it costs, but just because of time of implementation and the cost of consultancy for if you want any modifications or additions to it.
There would be no ROI. Yeah, you're right. There's no ROI
100%,
on it in any time plan for that. But tapping into places that have that would, is what's attractive about what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, being linked into companies that operate on those systems, absolutely. I could see how, as a print supplier, you want to be integrated to as many customers as possible. You need to be in their what do they call it, the SAP Ariba supplier network or supplier portal. You need to be in it. You've got to pay to play because so many big companies use it. It's an unfortunate reality.
As a technology provider, to get into that portal, it's about $20,000 a year. So
yeah, I don't know. I know a consultancy pretty well, actually, in the Netherlands that does SAP Ariba implementations more on the customer side. They work with companies like Vodafone and Adidas, ABN AMRO to sort of customize Ariba for their needs, but they can do it on the supply side as well, and they're helping to develop third-party apps as well that fit into Ariba. So yeah, a lot of their back end is done out of India, so they are pretty price competitive.
And do you think we're talking about this in a virtual print pub, but do you think printers and people who sell to the print industry, do you think we need to do more to engage with this market? And if we do, how do we do that? Because it seems if that's where people are willing to spend their money, then we should be talking to them a lot more.
In terms of speaking to IT consultancies that can help you get there, or just understanding which customers use Cooper and Ariba?
Understanding which customers, how do we tap into those customers? Is there any advice you could give us to speak to those kind of brands that are using it?
I mean, I think if you look through the FTSE 100 or the DAX 40 or the S&P 500, most of those companies are going to be using an enterprise suite for their procure to pay operations. And with Cooper and Ariba being the market leaders, some of them might be using iValue or Zycus or Jagger or some of the others, or Wax Digital, some of the others that are out there. But speak to their procurement teams, ask them what they're using, and just have a frank conversation. Say, do we need to be on there to stand a chance of doing business with you? And if you're getting the same answer from everyone, then it kind of answers the hypothesis of we think we should be in there to have a better chance at getting business.
Yeah. Can I just ask Matthew, do you ever come across this? Because this is your area, isn't it? Getting people to buy print more effectively.
Yes. So first of all, I'll caveat all this by saying I missed the first 15 minutes of the call, so apologies, because it's been interesting to hear what James said. And secondly, I don't have experience of maybe some of the new and nimble startups, which I'd be really interested to see. But when I was a buyer at Future, so a major magazine publisher, we were sold to regularly by people with eProcurement systems. And then later on, and as a consultant, I actually went in as a consultant on behalf of a major eProcurement software vendor to work with a print management company on using their software and certain projects that they were doing as well. So certain conclusions I drew from this, some of which won't probably apply to some of the more nimble people, is first of all, there has to be a big enough spend to justify the use of the eProcurement software, particularly because it appears to me that a lot of the companies not only want to use their software, but they also want to use their consultancy services. I could add a few adjectives to that, but I won't. But yeah, they want their consultancy services, and to be honest, their consultants know nothing about print, and they seem to be quite expensive to me. So that has to be borne in mind. If there's going to be a successful e-procurement tender on print, it only works if there is someone who understands print there. And I've seen many e-procurement sessions being run, tenders awarded, and then the winning company being able to bid low and then make massive profits afterwards because the work had absolutely no relation to what was put on the tendering documents at the time. So there is a real danger here for buyers if they're not putting in the right safeguards and not using the right knowledge base in there. I've also found that a lot of printing companies are really, really wary of engaging with these, to the point where I actually had an incumbent refuse to participate in an e-auction. So they lost the business immediately. I thought because they're the incumbent, they could come in and say, well, we're the incumbent, so we can say what we want. We said, yeah, we absolutely respect your right not to participate in this, but that's the way we're running it. So if you refuse to participate, you will win the work. Yeah, sorry, you will lose the work rather. But actually, there is a huge saving, I think, for a lot of the printing industry, because a lot of sales in the printing industry is still done on the traditional basis that when you have a big tender, you go in and see the client, you scope it out with them, you suggest some other ways. Your salesperson spends a lot of time writing reports about this and spending time. Then you put in your initial bidding, which is not realistic bidding, it's just a start for negotiations, and then go in and you take the buyer out for lunch if you're still allowed to, and you go through this lengthy process. Whereas actually for me, as a buyer and for the bidders, you can get through this process using the right e-procurement software in hours rather than months, which is what it used to take. And I think a lot of printing companies aren't looking at that and saying, actually, we've got an opportunity here to spend a lot less time in acquiring work if we approach it with the right attitude. And it comes with a lot of caveats, because there's a lot of people out there who are running e-procurement who don't know what they're doing in print. But there are opportunities there as well. And if it's done correctly, then carry on with e-procurement further on down the line and putting in the likes of vPress for catalogue purchasing. You can then manage your work in plant a lot more efficiently if you link it up with your in-house systems as well. Yeah, and with the right discussions, I think you can automate an awful lot of your catalogue print procurement. So those are my kind of 3-minute views on it. And I welcome James's or anyone's thoughts and challenges on that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with the vast majority of what you said, Matthew. Yeah, 100%. I'm certainly with you in terms of some of the, let's say, larger and clunkier e-procurement systems, and yeah, I think there's a good, maybe I'm being slightly cynical on this, I think there's a good reason why the big consultancies partner with the likes of SAP, Ariba and Cooper and these big suites, because they know that they can make a ton of money through consultancy, because the implementation takes so long and it's not an agile system. Whereas a lot of the smaller, leaner startups, they sell their software on the fact of digitize within a day. And I think there is a certain pinch of salt that I would take with that, but certainly digitize within 2 or 3 weeks, I think is a realistic mantra that I would put my name and brand behind, because you can, because it just, and I do take your point as well around print being very nuanced. I know I'm good friends actually with a lady in the US that has a print and promotional items background and comes from that sector, and is also a procurement person, and she always used to say, print is one of those things that a standard e-auction software, especially if it's being set up by a buyer that doesn't really understand the category, will just make a dog's dinner of. Logistics transportation is another one, just to give a neutral example. It's so complex, and a lot of the surcharges that the port authorities and that the shipping lines put onto the cost of the freight is very, very difficult to capture in a standardized sort of line item e-auction. So I agree with you that if suppliers approach it the right way, they can streamline the customer relationship, investment and time. But yeah, there is the risk that you're going to see a lot of garbage tenders, and it's the kind of thing as well, similar to things like spare parts. If you've got thousands and thousands of storeroom spare parts, a lot of it is non-repeatable spend, and it's difficult to put a representative basket of goods through a tender that you're going to buy. Hence, your comment that suppliers go in low and then just make a bunch of money on the specials afterwards, because they know their business better than the buyer in not all, but in many cases. And procurement typically, especially in the UK and the US, less so in places like Germany, procurement professionals tend to then switch role every 2 or 3 years because the companies want to get them to have experience on different categories to sort of go in and disrupt and not get too cozy to the supply base, for better, for worse. So yeah, you know, I take on board a lot of what you said, and yeah, you're absolutely right.
This has been.
I think that the real point of good consultancy at that level is to actually simplify the buyer's spend to begin with. So, you know, if you go in and look at someone's spend, you're going to have someone with, I don't know, 500 lines of spend that they're convinced, if they don't know enough about print, they've got 500 lines of spend, whereas actually they haven't. They've only got, you know, 150 maybe, once you start breaking it down and making things more easily for them as well. So, yeah, I think there's a real value, and I would, because I'm biased because I offer these services, but I think there's a real value in the right consultant coming in and linking up between the buyer and the e-procurement. You know, I'm platform neutral on the procurement, but you know, there's a skill in interpreting the buyer's requirement into a format that does work with the procurement.
Matthew, I think we'll all agree, we all need consultants, even though they're very much like rhinos because they don't listen and they charge a lot.
That's my speciality.
Anyway, James, we're coming up to the end of the hour. We've got to finish. We're trying. This is such a big subject and a massive opportunity for our industry in the print industry. At VPress, we do well on the back of the integrations that we do. If we need anything, if somebody wants to get in touch, what's the best way to get in touch?
LinkedIn's the easiest way to get in touch. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, like any business owner that ultimately has had the tables turned now and running my own business. I'm a seller, not a buyer these days, so that's the best place. I'll drop my I'll put it
in the group, so
or if you can put it in there, Kelvin, that would be awesome. Otherwise, my consulting website is jamesmeadconsulting.com, and the Procurement Tech directory is what I've got on my t-shirt. But yeah, just connect with me on LinkedIn, and if anyone would like to have a conversation offline, then yeah, we'd love to.
I'll share those links.
To learn a bit more.
I'll share those links in the pub chat. Follow us, the Crown Pub, on LinkedIn, because we're around, but we're not around next week because, unlike the French, we didn't kill and eat our royal family. We still have one. So it's the Queen's Jubilee next week, so we're all on holiday, thanks to the Queen, God bless her. So we won't be around next week, and there won't be a Crown Pub, but Joanna's just put in chat she'll see us next week, so she'll be lucky. But anyway, we're back the week after, and I think it's Mark Stevenson who's running it then. So Mark Stevenson about working in print with your family. So we've got another interesting conversation. So everyone, it was great to see everyone. I think numbers were down because of the event that's going on this week. But as always, we do this to make sure that everyone's okay in the print industry and to connect people. Take care, have a great weekend, enjoy the Queen's Jubilee. It's going to be good next week, and be safe. James, thank you, that was awesome, brilliant, thank you so much.
Thank you, pleasure.
Right,
thanks guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.